My name is Gerry Hull. I'm call sign VE1RM, and you may have also worked me as W1VE. I'm a blue noser from Halifax, Nova Scotia, who ended up living in southern New Hampshire, where I am right now. I've been a ham 45 years. Among my good friends in the hobby is my co-presenter in this presentation, Tom Haavisto, V3CX, the fantabulous TCA column editor, my Ontario North multiplier and sweepstakes, and Tom is joining via audio due to his limited internet bandwidth. And Tom, you're willing to, you can pop in at any time if you want to add something. We're going to have an open question session at the end here, and Tom will join us for that. I'd also like to mention Carrie Rubenfeld, VE4EA, who was going to be the original presenter of this talk, but he had another issue he had to take care of, so he wasn't able to present. And Carrie's a great CW op and training new CW contesters out in Manitoba, and he was the 2019 RAC Ham of the Year. Really great guy. So we're missing Carrie, but we'll continue on, and you can bear with me. Just a little about me, if you don't know me. I started my contesting career long ago in the 1970s, operating from Bob Billings, VE1YX's place in Bridgewater, Nova Scotia. We used a call sign VE1DXA, if anyone can remember that, but we used to battle it out with VE3EJ and VE6SV in the multi-single category in DX contests. So at that time, way back in the 70s, I fell in love with multi-op radio contesting and been doing it ever since. But today's amateur radio is still a lot like that, and even contesting is a lot like that, but so many things have changed over the years, and that's part of what we're going to talk about today. So what we'll cover in this talk? What is remote operation and remote contesting? You may not be familiar at all. How hard is it, and how might we do it? Is it competitive? Does it have advantages or disadvantages? How remote contesting can enable safe, successful multi-operator contesting during COVID-19 and social distancing. A lot of hams are at the age where we're very vulnerable, so it's very important to protect ourselves. That doesn't mean we can't enjoy the fun activity of contesting. I'll warn you ahead of time, this is not a how-to talk. There's a lot of technology in remote, but it's all doable, and lots of us are doing it. But what I'll do is talk about the many ways you can do remote operation. And at the end of the talk here, I'll have a list of URLs where you can get more how-to information. But this is just more an informational session about what's going on in remote contesting. And before I do that, I'm going to talk about this cover slide here because it'll show you, give you some detail about some of the big contest stations that are doing remote operation today. And this is just a small sampling. So the background photograph at the top is a station called WA6TQT, which is in Nyanza in Southern California. As you can see, it's out there in the desert with plenty of land, room for towers, etc. By any measure, it is a dream contest station. It solves a problem for a lot of Southern California guys in LA and San Diego. They are house rich and land poor, which seems to be happening in a lot of places around the world. So many hams have small lots and antenna restrictions. Using remote capabilities, ops can enjoy the big station from home. More importantly, they can socially distance without any issues. And on the inset pictures, to the left there is one of the pictures from Gord V6SV near Edmonton, Manitoba. Now, Gord isn't doing remote right now, but he's certainly going to. He's hosted many world-class multi-2 and single op operations from his place. Like many station hosts, finding guys to fly into Edmonton or even finding locals is a challenge. Due to COVID and other issues, GORD is now setting up remote capabilities so that the station can be fully staffed without any worry about possible infections or anybody getting sick, which should be great. I hope I can participate in that. The second inset picture to the left there is the QTH of J. Allen, VY1JA. Well, it's a little small in that picture, but Jay's located in Whitehorse in the Yukon Territory of Canada. And through a chance meeting, Jay and I became very good friends. We both had an interest in remote operating. So for the last 4 years, we put VY1AAA on the air on CW in many contests and for many DX operations, and made over 30,000 QSOs via remote in the last 4 years. Jay's health, unfortunately, has deteriorated and the station's no longer in operation. However, it showed the power of remote operation. It can bring rare stations to the air with regularity. I had the opportunity to operate Swedish powerhouse SK3 Whiskey during the IARU radio sport in WRTC 2010. I operated the station remotely from Boston, Massachusetts. And this incredible station was built by Gus, SM3SGP, and is operated by many of the Swedish ops who are also limited by land and city dwellers. Sugar Kilo 3 Whiskey is been remote capable for many years. And the last inset there is the 20-meter stack at K1TTT, owned by Dave Robbins in Peru, Massachusetts. Dave is unique among many multi owners in the world. Show up at his station with an amateur radio license and you get a seat at the operating position. So many new contesters have been to Dave's and got the taste for a big time contest operation. In the age of COVID-19 and the pandemic, it is all but impossible to host operators in the shack in the multi-operator category, in multi-single. For the 2020 contest season, Dave has decided to have all remote operators for the station, so they can be practically anywhere in the world. And then finally, the inset picture on the bottom right there. That's me operating field day from my friend's station in Massachusetts, Jim K1IR. Jim has had a multi-single station, a multi-single, multi-two for quite a few years. And of course, during COVID, we did not want any operators in the shack. And for ARRL Field Day last year, for the changed rules, we decided we didn't want to go in the field and be in a tent, but we'd really like to participate, and we wanted to see how remote would work. So within a short period of time, we set up 2 remote stations and plus Jim operating from the shack. And this is me operating from New Hampshire, doing remote, and it worked very well. So it was pretty interesting. So how long's remote been around? A lot of people ask about that. Remote amateur radio is obviously is a method for controlling an amateur radio station from a remote location. It's been around since the early days of the hobby. However, prior to the availability of high-speed internet access, it was primarily limited to somewhat local installations using UHF radios, microwave, or, as many of the guys that I knew, expensive telephone lines. It certainly wasn't very common. There was a couple of stations in Vermont that had remote, some in California that I knew of, but and probably some in Europe, but very limited to people with resources to spend and a lot of time to build custom solutions. So that's all changed. High-speed internet is commonplace. It's commonplace in North America and most regions of the world. And typically those are things like cable, DSL, and fiber optic. Now, obviously, I know I have people watching now that are on from the northern parts of Canada, where geosynchronous satellite internet is typically what people have. Sometimes there's DSL service, but that's often supplied also by a satellite link. And those are not compatible with remote operation. There's too much latency or delay in delivery of packets, and it's quite unreliable for a remote operation. However, there's good news on the horizon. Two satellite companies, Elon Musk's company and Facebook, have both started deploying low Earth orbit satellite networks. And those low Earth orbit satellite networks will have very, very low latency in the order of 50 to 60 milliseconds and have multi-hundreds of megabits of bandwidth. So they should make remote operation very capable from any place on the planet. And part of the good news for Canadians is that, especially with Starlink, which is Elon Musk's product, that's going to start in the Northern Hemisphere first. So that should be available, I would think, before the middle of 2021. And they're talking about prices in the order of $50 to $60 a month for this service. A small terminal that I don't know if it's going to be outside in the Northern Hemisphere, but is very, very small, very, very small terminals to do that, which will give very, very high speed. And although I don't want to get into too many technical issues, if you have cable, DSL, or fiber optic, you're pretty good to go. The only issues that you will find with remote operation on the internet is if you're using a multi-point-to-point wireless ISP. That has some difficulties that are very hard to overcome. So usually there's another option, hopefully, that you have if you're on a wireless point to multi-point. In other words, you have a wireless service provider and you get service from them. That might be an issue. But other than that, the good news is cable, DSL, and fiber optic are available in most areas and will work for remote operation. And what I'm going to go through now is a list of how you can do remote. There are many options, from essentially point and shoot with a mouse to a custom solution you put together yourself. And I'm just going to go over a lot of the various solutions that are available for remote operation. So what you're looking at here is a picture of remote ham radio. And remote ham radio is a station as a service offering on the internet from a group of guys in the United States. And you may have heard of them. You may have seen posts on Facebook and other places, or worked one of their stations on the air. The only thing you need to operate an RHR station is a web browser, and a headset for audio, and microphone if you're going to do sideband, or you use the keyboard on CW. So you can do all modes, you connect to their site, and you operate. It costs money to operate. It's a rental service. They have stations all over the United States. They have one of the biggest stations in North America in Maine. And it's very cool, but it's expensive to rent. Some people like to do that. It's a way to do it. Of course, the other requirement is that you must have a United States amateur radio license. And we're going to talk about licensing and cross-border operation and things of that nature a little bit later on. But as long as you've got a U.S. license from Canada, from anywhere in the world, if you hold a U.S. license, you can get onto remote ham radio and operate without any gear or equipment. Kind of neat. At the next level, we now have manufacturers that are manufacturing amateur radio equipment that essentially has remote operation as a native feature. Flex Radio Systems, American company, has a complete line of radios that can do this. And not only can you use your PC desktop to control a remote radio, they have a remote console, Maestro here on the left-hand side, which gives you a very, very complex and very sophisticated radio that you can operate over the internet. And pretty much If you have a good Ethernet connection, it hooks up and it works. And it's essentially plug and play. And these are in the price range of the top end of radios. And if you have good internet connections, it works flawlessly. Very, very nice radios. And among Canadians, we have Mike V3 Mike Whiskey, who's an expert on Flex. So if you want to talk to him about Flex radios, he's the guy to go to. I've used them a few times, and it was quite impressive. So that's another plug and play solution for remote. It's there, it works. So then, what other solutions do we have for amateur radio? Here's a set of hardware solutions that is widely used for remote among thousands of stations, as far as from my knowledge of it. And this is what I use for remote operation. It's a set of boxes from a company in Sweden called Microbit, and the product is called Remote Rig. It's a set of 2 hardware boxes that connect the audio, CW, send receive audio, CW connections, and CAT control, computer control, between 2 radios over the internet. What's very interesting about these boxes is that they're very configurable. So they're not hardware manufacturer specific. For example, they'll work with the Elecraft K3 and the remote head for the K3 called the K30 Mini. That's what I use. It's extremely popular. Unfortunately, the K3 and K30 are not being made by Elecraft anymore. We have to use the K4, but it certainly allows existing stations to do remote operation. Another interesting feature of the remote rig is that it works with most HF radios that have a detachable control head. So for example, the TS480, the radio can live at the station and the remote head lives where you're remote. There's a Yaesu twin mode. So if you have a pair of FT5000s or FT2000s or other Yaesu radios, you can have one at the operating location and another at the remote location, and you power up the remote radio and the other radio comes up exactly and follows it. So the remote rig option is a way to have hardware remote. It eliminates a lot of specialized configuration, and it's pretty flawless. I use this for my DSL connection to VY1JA, which was over 4,500 kilometers away, and had many hundreds of trouble-free hours operating remote with it. So I enjoyed using that. But there are still other solutions. So if you're an Icom radio fan, there's the Icom Ba1 software. So this is a software package that allows you to remote into a lot of different Icom radios. It's a software package, so you use a virtual control panel at your remote location, and it either connects to a PC at the station location, or if depending on the radio you have, the radio will have an Ethernet jack on the back of it. It plugs right into the Ethernet jack on the radio. This remote software even includes the spectrum scope, so it's quite usable and works extremely well. Again, these are paid for packages. It's not it's a reasonably priced package and works very well. What happens if you don't want to spend any money but you still want to do remote? So the good news is there are free remote software packages, and many of you may have already seen this package and many have not. This software on the left is called RC4 Remote. It's from Remote Hams. RemoteHams.com is the website for this service, and this is a downloadable free software package. One piece of software installs on your desktop computer and connects to your radio over RS-232 or USB, your CAT control connection. And the interesting thing is it controls most brands of radios, including old ones. So that's why I'm showing a Yaesu, a Kenwood TS940 here, which had an external device, IF232C, but it still can be cat controlled. And the user interface on the remote ham software is a kind of a common interface, but it changes to show whatever features are supported by your radio type. But it allows you to operate a station remotely, and you get the audio, and it works very well. It works very, very well. To get perfect CW, you need a bit more hardware, but you know, there are ways to work around it. But it'll certainly get you on remote, and on sideband it works extremely well. It's free, and again, it's a client you download and run on your desktop where your station is, and then from any remote device you can log into it. If you're familiar with remote hams, if you go to their website, on their website they list many remote stations. If you want to participate in this and be a host for a remote, you do not have to expose your station to other operators. It can be a private connection, so you don't have to do that. So this is kind of an off-the-shelf free remote solution that's targeted at ham radio. But there is an even more basic way to get yourself on remote. And that's called using off-the-shelf software and a little ham ingenuity. The inset picture here in black is actually my first remote operations from VY1JA. And what I'm looking at there is his remote desktop on his PC in Whitehorse. And I think at that time we were using TeamViewer. So TeamViewer is a commercial product that does have a free version. Equivalent to TeamViewer is AnyDesk. That's another remote desktop solution. And I know a lot of people like to use VNC, which is an open source remote desktop solution. So the key here is you need some level of station automation in your contest shack. And we all know that you have, if you're contesting at all in a modern world, you have a contest logger that's connected to your PC. So that's already doing a lot of the control capabilities. Other things that you can add to make your station work better on remote are things like, you know, a view of your amplifier if it has remote capability, your antenna switching, and things of that nature. So TeamViewer, AnyDesk, and VNC are really good at getting the desktop itself getting the desktop to your station, but you need audio. So one solution is using Skype, which is very good for that, and there are other IP network software that will transmit sound. So it's a little bit of glue, it's a little bit of work, but it works very, very well. In my list of URLs at the end of the talk here, I will link you to a presentation that I did on YouTube, which goes through step by step how to set up remote using a remote desktop application in Skype. So if you want to try out remote, it's a good way to do it. So why remote? Remotes get rid of local and or physical restrictions. You're in an apartment, there's no way you can have antennas, or you're in a commercial area where you have a lot of interference, all of those kinds of things. It gives you the ability to operate from other locations where travel might or might not be possible. It allows you to supply, my reason for why I like to do remote is it supplies operators for multi-operator contest stations where travel is not necessarily possible. And it may be for cost reasons, it might be for time reasons, or in this COVID-19 pandemic period we're in, just not to get together. We want to stay healthy. Or, like I did with VY1AAA, it's an opportunity to put a rare location on the air. So those are some of the reasons for operating remote. Okay, so hold on. Okay, the elephant in the room. So let's talk about legal issues. Within Canada, you need an advanced amateur license to operate remote. That's right there in ISED regulations. So you should have an advanced amateur if you're operating a remote station. If you operate across a remote international border, the situation becomes a bit murky. In a word, yes, you can operate across international borders. The issue is we're innovators. Amateur radio does things before regulations can catch up. Amateur radio regulations change at a snail's pace. So there are no written regulations about operating amateur radio stations across political borders other than being present in the foreign country. So what does that mean? That means that at the moment, we operate across borders anyway, and we follow best practices. So for example, for my VY1AAA operations, we had multiple operators. Operators outside Canada had to have held a Canadian advanced license. Typically, like remote ham radio does in the US, you must have a US license to operate a US station. Don't assume a CEPT or other reciprocal visiting operating agreement gives you the right to operate remotely. Those regulations are written if you are present in the country. That doesn't mean you can't operate remotely. And the important thing to remember is ask a local ham what the story is on remote operation. Tom V3CX operates at PJ2T. He hasn't operated remotely, but they offer remote. They do have remote capabilities at the station. You cannot use it remotely unless you can't operate it remotely unless an operator is present in the station. That's the policy of the station owners because it's not exactly clear whether a fully remote operator could operate the station. When I operated from Sweden at SK3W a few years ago, the Swedish National Amateur Radio Organization is the licensee for hams, and they license the hams in Sweden, and they don't have any objection to remote operation. This varies from country to country. I also operated PR1T from Brazil, and what I found out in Brazil is because we have Echolink on VHF, where there are people operating remotely across the world, the government in Brazil said, okay, you can operate remotely, but as long as you stay within the regulations. It's our best practice right now to operate correctly. Always, always, always identify if you're operating remotely with the country prefix of the country where the transmitter is. Don't try to work DX from some rare location because using your own country's call sign. This is not how we need to behave. And that's all there is to say. At some point, international regulation will catch up with us, but if more and more remote operators will be on, and if we're doing things in a good way, we're operating properly, I don't think we'll run into any major issues. So going remote for multi-singles. I just wanted to pass along a few strategies and hints that I've had. And just for a couple of pictures, that's Tom V3CX in the upper left and Carrie V4EA. And of course, they're operating locally. This is in the 2000, I think it was 15 CQ Worldwide CW, operating from K2LE in northern Vermont. And that station is fully remoted. And what's interesting is Cary operates it from Winnipeg a lot, and we have various operators from around the country. In the bottom left picture, that's Ollie F1AKK operating VY1AAA, who we worked many times from home, from Germany when I was there for WRTC. So operating remote can be a lot of fun. So based on your radio equipment, decide on a remote strategy. Do you have a glass desktop? Do you have most of your automation already in your station? So that could help make a decision. If you're running flex hardware, it makes the decision very easy. just as a performance, I won't advocate any one particular solution, but just knowing from experience, hardware solutions offer the best performance. So if you're trying to do a very high performance contest station, it's best done with hardware, not software solutions. What kind of logging are you going to do? If you're multi-single and you're using only one radio, are you going to stop one operator and have another operator connect? Are you going to have every operator connected all the time? If you have remote hardware, there's the possibility of logging on each remote operator's computer, for example, running N1MM. And if you do that, you got to have a virtual private network or VPN to make sure that you can connect the logs. So these are all things that you have to plan for ahead of time. Single op at a time or multiple radios connected. You'll have to deal with what the bandwidth availability is and those kinds of things. Something else to think about is geographic diversity for your operators. So if we're thinking about North America and you're operating an East Coast station, wouldn't it be wonderful to have a West Coast operator who can fill in at 2 in the morning till 7 in the morning or whatever? And they might be interested in operating 160 where they might not be able to operate from the East Coast. So thinking about where you might grab operators from becomes a really interesting task when you go remote. So that's all I have. Thank you. Here are a list of some of the URLs that we of the solutions that I talked about. There's the YCCC SIG I did on how to do remote with Skype. So that's a total how-to if you want to do. There's my email address and Tom's. If you have some questions, you can also email us. Let's spend the rest of the time asking or answering any questions that you might have. And if I could ask Jeff, excuse me, to look at any chat questions for that.
Yeah, Gerry. So the first question we have here, and anybody who wants to ask a question, you can either post it in the chat or click the Q&A button at the bottom. And either way, we'll get to you guys. Keith Whitney V7KW says, does a VPN connection offer benefits and latency? ISP buffering has been an issue.
It can be. It can be. It's not a guaranteed. But depending on because latency generally follows the the connection itself, the path between you and the station you're connecting with. And if that goes through 5 routers, it's still going to go through 5 routers on a VPN. A VPN, and I'm talking about a point-to-point VPN, a connection at you and a connection at the other end. Routers cause latency, and it all depends on the path. So it can, but in general, I don't find any difference between being on a VPN or not.
Excellent. Let's see. We have Igor VA3 YDX asks, Gerry, which remote stations can you recommend in Canada?
There are no, because I don't want to make any recommendation for any one individual, but there are many. I think Igor, send me a private email. On the webinar here, I don't want to speak for station owners, but there are quite a few remote stations in place, and potentially they're looking for operators. So yeah, you could drop me an email and I'll talk to you about
that. Perfect. Wayne Stacy V3QO asks, when operating your own station remotely, it's best to have a way to start up the equipment from a cold start. Any thoughts on how to do this?
On how to create a remote or just start it up? That's what I'm not sure of the question.
I think it's the startup process that you would that you'd go through. So how would you do it? Yeah, to turn just to turn things on and off remotely. So how would you turn on your rig remotely, your amp remotely, the coffee maker, whatever?
Okay, yeah, a lot of these are sort of technical detail questions, but an important thing to have if you're going to have a remote station is to have some way of turning AC items on and off, AC powered items. There are things called IP remote power switches. One of them is called the web power switch. If you search Google for it, you'll find it. I think it's $120. It gives you 8 remote outlets, AC outlets, and it connects via a web browser, which you'll have to set up to forward via your router. But then you'll have a web page where you can turn things on and off remotely. Now, the order of turning them on depends on what remote technology you might have. So it depends. But usually, if you leave your gear powered off, you would go onto your remote power switch and power up all your remote gear and then attempt to connect to it.
Excellent. Is there any other questions for anybody either in the chat? I know myself personally for my remote shack, I use a power strip from a company called Next Solutions. And it's I think it's a 4-port USB and a 4-port AC that does full 15 amps. And each port, even the USBs, can be turned on and off remotely.
Yes,
Just
yes.
through an app.
Yeah,
it's great for
actually,
starting and stopping the Raspberry Pi remotely.
Yeah, there are actually, you want to do it on the cheap, there are many Wi-Fi based remote power strips that you can use Amazon Alexa to control. And the Alexa doesn't have to, as long as it knows that you register it, it could be remote and you could just command it via voice to turn on your gear. It's another way to do it.
Well, Jared, it doesn't look like we have any other questions. Oh, actually, no, we do here. Can you use a bencher and still operate remotely? That's from Carol, VA7QCE.
Hi, Carol. Possibly. Depends on your remote solution. So quickly, if you're using Remote Rig has a paddle input specified. It's in it. And you plug the paddle in and it does perfect CW over the internet. It uses what's called, what's built into it is software called WinKey. WinKey's from K1EL. He's a company in New England here. And if you have a WinKey, there are ways to use a WinKey on both the station end and the remote end, and you can plug any standard paddle into that and operate remote flawlessly. Any other questions? Any comments, Tom?
Oops.
No, great job, Gerry, and yeah, really appreciate you.
So Stan has a question, V3TW. It all sounds so simple. What kind of things often go wrong?
That's a great question. Lots. until you find out what you need to do. So the best thing to do is test your remote path a lot when you're, because if you're a contester, you don't want it to fail during a contest. So you want to make sure that you have a good path to the remote location, and that you're not on a wireless, like I said, a wireless ISP. They don't work well. Other than that, there are really no major latency drops. The killer, and I didn't want to get too technical, but the killer in remote operation is something called jitter. And what jitter is, it's the instantaneous difference in latency. Now, a lot of hams who haven't done remote before worry about how long the signal takes to get across the internet. It's really not a factor. It pretty much doesn't matter. Done major contests with big pileups and try to break pileups, and that all works just fine. But if the instantaneous latency changes rapidly, in other words, if it goes from 150 milliseconds to 1,000 milliseconds and back to 150 milliseconds again, that's tremendous jitter. And that causes the audio to break up. And if you're on CW, you miss characters. If you're on sideband, you miss parts of speech. And that can be typically caused by the internet technology that you're using. Once you eliminate that, you're pretty good to go. What else can happen? If you're using Remote Rig and you lose your connection to your remote for any reason, you must stop your contest software and restart everything. So the biggest thing that happens is you have to restart software. And usually that can take, anywhere from 10 to 30 seconds, but it's not terrible and it's totally recoverable. So the biggest thing I can tell people if they want to try remote is test. don't do it. Don't start the project even the day before a contest. Try it before, and you'll figure out the issues.
And just as my call sign indicates, VA3 ISP, I actually run a wireless ISP. And my personal house is 3 microwave hops deep. I have sub 20 milliseconds to the internet and about 3 milliseconds of jitter. So it is possible. It is possible to do it. It's just it has to be a properly designed network.
Correct. And you're not multi-point to point. You're point to point.
Oh no, multi-point to point. Yeah.
And
my last hop is multi-point.
Time division.
Yes and no. So we use from Ubiquity. So
yes,
they have a little bit of TDMA and a little bit of their own special sauce all integrated into it.
But, well, very good, Jeff. I'm very glad to hear that, and I'd like to have a conversation with you sometime about that, because many of my own, I used to live where I only had a wireless ISP, and there's a bunch of guys in Winnipeg doing stuff with multi-point to point, and we've never gotten remote to work over it. So we need to find out your special sauce.
Investing in good hardware on the routing side, because like you said, it's all about it's all about routing. But I don't think we have any other questions here. If anybody else has other questions, go ahead and post them in either in the Q&A or in the chat on the side. And if there's nothing else, then we'll leave our panelists to go work some DX for the rest of the afternoon.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining, and I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody. We're going to close on this session and let you all have let's see here, about a 15-minute break before the last sessions kick in. Thanks very much. Thanks to our participants, and we'll happily catch you on the air.
Okay, 73. See ya.